I've always hated masquerade parties. There's something fundamentally dishonest about a room full of people hiding behind masks, pretending to be mysterious and interesting when really they are just drunk accountants and desperate housewives looking for validation. But here I was, Greg Hartley, 38 years old, district manager for a chain of upscale restaurants, standing in Richard Kline's oversized living room wearing a cheap Phantom of the Opera mask that was already making my face sweat. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. Greg, there you are. Richard appeared beside me, dressed as some kind of Renaissance nobleman, complete with a ridiculous feathered hat. Where's Alicia? Bathroom, I said, sipping the overpriced whiskey he'd handed me. She's been in there for 20 minutes. I think she's gluing extra sequins to her costume or something. Richard laughed, that booming sound that had made him popular at every party since college. Women, right? Nikki spent 3 hours getting ready. 3 hours. For a mask that covers half her face. I smiled, but it felt hollow. The truth was, Alicia had been distant for months. Late-night texts she'd hide when I walked into the room, extra trips to the gym with her best friend Susie, new lingerie that I'd never seen her wear, all the classic signs that every husband learns to recognize but desperately wants to ignore. So, who do you think would win? Richard was saying. Hulk or Superman? Depends on the writer, I said automatically. It was an old debate, one we'd had 1,000 times. Comic books are whatever the plot needs them to be. Come on, man, you're no fun anymore. Richard nudged me. Remember when we used to argue about this stuff for hours? We were also 20 and drunk on cheap beer. And now we're 40 and drunk on expensive whiskey. Progress. He raised his glass, and I clinked mine against it, feeling the weight of every year between then and now. That's when I saw her. Alicia, my wife of 12 years, emerged from the hallway in a stunning Catwoman costume that left very little to the imagination. The black leather hugged every curve, and her mask was elaborate, covered in tiny crystals that caught the light. She looked incredible. She also looked like she was scanning the room for someone, and that someone wasn't me. Wow, Richard breathed. Alicia looks amazing. Yeah, I said, watching as her eyes found their target. Dominic Vega, our friend Susie's husband, dressed in what could generously be called a gladiator costume, but looked more like an excuse to show off his gym-sculpted body. He was 40, cocky, worked as a supervisor at some factory, and apparently had decided that a leather loincloth was appropriate party attire. I watched Alicia cross the room toward him, her hips swaying in a way she hadn't moved for me in months. Dominic's face lit up when he saw her, and they immediately fell into conversation, standing closer than necessary, laughing at jokes I couldn't hear. Hey, isn't that Susie's husband? Richard asked, following my gaze. Yep. They seem friendly. Yep. You okay with that? I turned to look at Richard, my best friend since college, the guy who'd been best man at my wedding. Why wouldn't I be? They're friends. Alicia and Susie have been inseparable for years. Makes sense she'd know Dominic. But even as I said it, I knew it was bullshit. The way Alicia touched Dominic's arm, the way she tilted her head when she laughed, the way her body angled toward him like a flower seeking sun. That wasn't friendship. That was something else entirely. I'm going to get another drink, I said, heading toward the kitchen before Richard could respond. The kitchen was quieter, just a few people refilling glasses and picking at the elaborate spread of food Richard and Nikki had prepared. I was pouring myself a generous whiskey when I heard Alicia's laugh from around the corner in the small pantry area. You're terrible, she was saying, her voice low and playful in a way I hadn't heard in years. You love it, Dominic replied, and I could hear the smirk in his voice. I moved closer, staying out of sight, my heart hammering in my chest. We have to be careful, Alicia said. Greg's not stupid. Greg's a restaurant manager who talks about comic books. Trust me, he's not paying attention. The words hit me like a physical blow. Not because they were cruel, though they were, but because they confirmed what I'd been afraid to admit to myself for months. Still, Alicia said, we should... Greg, there you are. I spun around to find Susie Vega standing behind me, dressed as some kind of Egyptian queen, her mask pushed up on her head. She was 37, outgoing, clever, and right now looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Susie, hey, looking for Alicia? She stepped closer, lowering her voice. I saw her head toward the pantry with Dominic. I know. Do you? She tilted her head, studying me. You really should keep an eye on your wife tonight, Greg. Masquerade parties have a way of bringing out people's true faces. Before I could respond, she walked past me into the main area of the kitchen, leaving me standing there with my whiskey and my racing thoughts. I didn't confront them. Not that night. Instead, I played the role of oblivious husband, smiling and chatting and pretending everything was fine while my world quietly collapsed around me. I watched Alicia and Dominic dance, their bodies pressed together in a way that made my stomach turn. I watched Susie watch them, her expression unreadable behind her mask, and I drank, more than I should have, letting the whiskey numb the sharp edges of betrayal. "You okay, man?" Richard asked around midnight, finding me on his back deck, staring at the stars. "Fine, just needed some air." "You've been weird all night. Is everything okay with you and Alicia?" I considered telling him. Richard was my best friend, had been for 20 years, but something held me back. Maybe pride, maybe the fear that saying it out loud would make it real. "Everything's fine," I lied. "Just tired. Long week at work." Richard didn't look convinced, but he let it go, clapping me on the shoulder before heading back inside. I drove home alone that night. Alicia texted me at 1 a.m. saying she was getting a ride from Susie, that she'd had too much to drink. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing through every sign I'd missed, every red flag I'd ignored. The gym bag I'd found in her car 3 months ago, smelling of men's cologne that wasn't mine. The way she'd started dressing differently, wearing makeup to run errands. The late-night texts she'd delete before I could see them. The new password on her phone that she claimed was for security purposes. I'd been a fool. Or maybe I'd just been a coward, too afraid to face the truth. Alicia came home at 3 a.m., stumbling slightly as she tried to be quiet. I pretended to be asleep, listening as she undressed in the bathroom, showered, washing away evidence, I thought bitterly, and finally climbed into bed beside me. She smelled like expensive perfume and someone else's sweat. The next 2 weeks were torture. I watched Alicia like a hawk, noting every text, every unexplained absence, every lie. I became someone I didn't recognize, checking her phone when she was in the shower, following her car when she said she was meeting Susie for lunch. And I was right to be paranoid. She was meeting Dominic. At hotels, at his house when Susie was at work, in parking lots where they'd sit in his Mustang. That ridiculous red Mustang he was so proud of, with the windows fogged up like teenagers. I took photos, documented everything. Not because I planned to divorce her, though that was certainly on the table, but because I needed proof. I needed to know I wasn't crazy, that my instincts were right. It was during one of these surveillance sessions that I overheard something interesting. I was parked across the street from Dominic's house, watching Alicia's car in his driveway when Susie pulled up. I ducked down, expecting a confrontation, but instead, Susie walked calmly into the house with her own key. 15 minutes later, all three of them emerged. Alicia looked flustered, Dominic looked smug, and Susie looked amused? They talked for a few minutes on the front lawn, and while I couldn't hear what they were saying, the body language was clear. Susie wasn't angry. She wasn't surprised. She was complicit. That's when things stopped making sense. 2 days later, Alicia announced we were going to dinner with Dominic and Susie. "Why?" I asked, looking up from my laptop where I'd been reviewing quarterly reports. "Because they're our friends, Greg. We haven't done couple things in forever. We saw them at Richard's party 2 weeks ago. That doesn't count. That was a party. This is different." She was using that tone, the one that suggested I was being difficult for no reason. Susie already made reservations at Marcello's, 7 p.m. on Friday. Marcello's? One of the restaurants in my company's portfolio, which meant I'd know the staff, which meant this would be even more humiliating. "Fine," I said, because I'd already formed a plan. If they wanted to play games, I could play too. Friday came, and I arrived at Marcello's early. I pulled aside Karen, one of our best bartenders, someone I'd known for years. "I need a favor," I said, "and it's going to sound weird." Karen raised an eyebrow. "How weird?" "I need you to keep an eye on my table tonight, specifically on my wife and the other couple we're dining with. If you see anything inappropriate, I need you to document it." Karen's expression shifted from curious to concerned. "Greg, what's going on?" "Just trust me, please." She studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "Okay, but you owe me the full story later." The dinner was excruciating. Alicia and Dominic kept exchanging glances, little smiles that they thought were subtle. Susie played the role of oblivious wife perfectly, chatting about her job at the marketing firm, asking me about the restaurant business, acting like everything was normal. But I'd learned something from my surveillance. Susie wasn't oblivious. She was orchestrating something. Halfway through the meal, I excused myself to use the restroom. Instead, I found Karen at the bar. "Well?" I asked. "Your wife's playing footsie with the gladiator under the table," Karen said bluntly. And his wife knows. She looked right at them doing it and just smiled. What the hell is going on? You want my theory? Karen leaned closer. I've seen this before. Some couples have arrangements. Open marriages, swinging, whatever you want to call it. Maybe his wife is into it. And my wife? Karen's expression softened. I'm sorry, Greg, but yeah, your wife is definitely into it. I returned to the table feeling like I'd been punched in the gut, but I kept my composure, smiled, made small talk, played the fool they all thought I was. It was when we were leaving that I made my move. Oh, Dominic, I said casually as we stood in the parking lot. I forgot to mention, I invited someone to join us for drinks. Hope you don't mind. Who? Alicia asked, her voice sharp. Right on cue, a woman appeared from the shadows near the entrance. She was tall, blonde, wearing a tight dress that showed off her figure, and from the way Dominic's face went pale, I knew my research had paid off. Dominic? The woman said, her voice confused. What are you doing here? Oh, Melissa, Dominic stammered. This is his wife, Susie said calmly, extending her hand. Susie Vega. And you are? Melissa Crawford. She looked at Dominic, hurt and anger flashing across her face. You told me you were divorced. The parking lot erupted. Melissa started yelling at Dominic, calling him every name in the book. Alicia tried to intervene, which only made Melissa turn on her. Susie stood back, watching the chaos with that same unreadable expression. And I stood there, feeling a savage satisfaction as Dominic's carefully constructed lies fell apart in public, in front of the woman he'd been sleeping with behind everyone's backs, including, apparently, my wife's. You bastard! Melissa shouted, slapping Dominic hard across the face. You said you loved me. I do, Dominic protested. I did. Oh, shut up, Susie said, her voice cutting through the noise. She turned to Melissa. He told you he was divorced? Honey, he tells everyone that. You're number 3 this year. The silence that followed was deafening. Alicia stared at Dominic. Number 3? It's not... She's lying. Dominic started, but Susie cut him off. Really? Should I call Jennifer from the gym? Or what about that bartender from O'Malley's? I watched my wife's face crumble as she realized she wasn't special. She was just another conquest, another ego boost for a middle-aged factory supervisor having a midlife crisis. Greg, Alicia said, turning to me with tears in her eyes. Greg, I can explain. Can you? I asked, my voice cold. Because I'd love to hear the explanation for the last 6 months of lies. Her face went white. You knew? I'm a restaurant manager who talks about comic books, I said, throwing Dominic's words back at him. But I'm not blind. I turned and walked away, leaving all of them standing in that parking lot, their masks finally stripped away. But I wasn't done, not even close. The next morning, I got a text from an unknown number. Meet me. We need to talk. S. I knew it was Susie. We met at a coffee shop across town, far from anywhere we might run into mutual friends. You planned that, she said as soon as I sat down. It wasn't a question. I did. Good. She sipped her latte, studying me over the rim. I've known about Dominic's affairs for 3 years. Alicia was just the latest. And you stayed with him? I have 2 kids and a mortgage. Divorce is expensive and messy, but I've been documenting everything, building a case. She leaned forward. The thing is, Greg, I can't make my move yet. I need more time to secure the finances, to make sure I get full custody. But you have nothing holding you back. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting we help each other. You want revenge on Alicia and Dominic. I want to destroy Dominic financially and socially, so that when I do file for divorce, he has nothing left to fight me with. She pulled out her phone and showed me a folder full of documents. I have evidence of affairs, financial misconduct, everything. You help me ruin him publicly, and I'll help you make sure Alicia regrets ever betraying you. I should have said no. I should have walked away, filed for divorce, moved on with my life like a mature adult. But I'd been a boxer in my 20s before I went to college, before I became respectable. And boxers understand something fundamental about human nature. Sometimes the only response to being hit is to hit back harder. What do you need me to do? I asked. Over the next week, Susie and I became unlikely partners in destruction. She gave me access to Dominic's email, his text messages, his financial records. In return, I used my connections in the restaurant and hospitality industry to spread carefully crafted rumors. Dominic liked to brag about his conquests at work. Susie had recordings of him talking to his coworkers, describing his affairs in graphic detail, including the one with my wife. I made sure those recordings found their way to his boss. Alicia had been posting cryptic messages on social media for months, quotes about following your heart and living your truth. I compiled them into a timeline that perfectly matched her affair with Dominic and shared it anonymously on the neighborhood Facebook group, along with photos of them together that could be interpreted as romantic. I didn't post anything explicit, no revenge porn, nothing illegal. Just context, just truth. And I let the neighborhood gossip mill do the rest. It worked better than I could have imagined. Within 3 days, everyone knew. The whispers started at the grocery store, at school pickup, at the gym where Alicia and Dominic had first started their affair. Their friends began to distance themselves. Invitations dried up. People crossed the street to avoid them. Dominic's job became untenable. His boss couldn't fire him for having affairs, but he could make his life miserable, and he did. Dominic was passed over for a promotion he'd been promised. His coworkers stopped inviting him to lunch. He became a pariah. But I saved the best for last. Dominic was obsessed with his Mustang. He'd bought it 2 years ago, a cherry red 1969 classic that he'd restored himself. He spent every weekend polishing it, tuning it, showing it off. It was his pride and joy, the physical manifestation of his masculinity. Karen, my bartender friend, had a brother who worked at Dominic's gym. Through a series of perfectly legal but morally questionable steps, we obtained security footage from the gym's locker room. Not the showers, that would be illegal, but the common area where Dominic liked to strut around naked, flexing in the mirrors, taking selfies. The footage was embarrassing, but not pornographic. It showed Dominic's vanity, his insecurity, his desperate need for validation. We edited it into a compilation video set to ridiculous music and posted it anonymously to YouTube, then shared the link everywhere. The video went viral in our community. Thousands of views in the first day. Dominic became a meme, a joke, a cautionary tale about male midlife crisis. His gym revoked his membership. His coworkers mocked him mercilessly. Even his friends abandoned him. And through it all, Susie played the role of supportive wife perfectly, publicly standing by him while privately feeding Mel more ammunition. Alicia tried to reach out to me multiple times. Texts, calls, showing up at my office. I ignored all of it. I'd moved into a hotel and filed for divorce, but I'd made it clear through my lawyer that I wanted nothing from her except to be left alone. But she wouldn't let it go. 2 weeks after the parking lot confrontation, she showed up at my hotel room at midnight, drunk and crying. "Greg, please," she sobbed. "Please, we can fix this. I made a mistake. I'm sorry." I stood in the doorway, looking at this woman I'd loved for 12 years and felt nothing but contempt. "You're sorry you got caught," I said. "You're sorry everyone knows. But you're not sorry for what you did. That's not true. I love you. You love the life I gave you, the house, the stability, the respectability, but you don't love me. You haven't loved me in years." She reached for me and I stepped back. "It's over, Alicia. Sign the papers. Move on." "I won't," she screamed. "I won't let you do this. We can work through this." "There's nothing to work through. You made your choice. Now live with it." I closed the door in her face and listened to her sob in the hallway for 20 minutes before she finally left. But I still wasn't done. I had one final move to make. One last play that would cement their destruction and give me the closure I needed. Richard called me 3 weeks after the parking lot incident. "Greg, man, we need to talk." "About what?" "About this whole situation with Alicia and Dominic. People are saying you're behind all the rumors, all the leaked information." "Are they? Are you?" I considered lying, but Richard deserved better. "Some of it, not all. But yes, I've been evening the score." "Jesus, Greg." He sighed heavily. "Look, I get it. What they did was horrible. But don't you think you're taking this too far? People are talking about Dominic losing his job. Alicia's become a social outcast. When does it end?" "When I say it does." "That's not healthy, man. This revenge thing, it's eating you alive." "No," I said calmly. "What was eating me alive was pretending everything was fine while my wife fucked another man. This is therapeutic. I'm worried about you. Don't be. I'm better than I've been in months." And I was. For the first time in years, I felt clear-headed, purposeful. I'd spent so long being the nice guy, the understanding husband, the guy who didn't make waves. But nice guys finish last, and understanding husbands get cheated on. It was time to finish this. I called Richard back the next day. "I want to host a dinner party. At your place, if you'll let me." "Why my place?" "Because it's neutral ground, and because I want to do this right, with witnesses." "Do what right?" "Make peace. Move on, end this whole thing properly. Richard was quiet for a long moment. You're serious? Completely. I'll pay for everything. Catering, drinks, the works. All you have to do is provide the venue and send the invitations. Who are you inviting? Everyone. Alicia, Dominic, Susie, all our mutual friends. Everyone who's been affected by this mess. It's time to clear the air. Richard agreed, probably because he hoped it would help me move on. He had no idea what I was actually planning. The invitations went out for a reconciliation dinner at Richard's house. To my surprise, both Alicia and Dominic accepted. Maybe they were desperate for social rehabilitation. Maybe they thought I was offering an olive branch. Either way, they showed up. So did 30 other people. Friends, neighbors, co-workers, even Dominic's boss and some of his factory colleagues. I'd made sure to invite everyone who mattered, everyone who'd been touched by the scandal. Richard's house was decorated beautifully, almost like a wedding reception. White tablecloths, candles, flowers. I'd spared no expense. This is really nice, Greg, Richard said as people arrived. I'm proud of you for doing this. Thanks, man. It means a lot. Alicia arrived wearing a conservative dress, her hair pulled back, looking nervous. Dominic came in a suit, also subdued. They sat together at a table near the back, whispering to each other. Susie arrived last, wearing a stunning red dress, looking confident and powerful. She caught my eye across the room and gave me a small nod. Everyone was here. It was time. I stood up and tapped my glass with a knife, calling for attention. The room quieted, all eyes turning to me. Thank you all for coming, I began, my voice steady. I know the last few weeks have been difficult for everyone, and I wanted to bring us all together tonight to address everything that's happened. Alicia looked hopeful. Dominic looked wary. When I found out about my wife's affair, I continued, I was devastated, betrayed, angry, all the emotions you'd expect. And I'll admit, I didn't handle it perfectly. I let my anger guide my actions, and I hurt people in the process. Murmurs of agreement from the crowd. Alicia was crying now, probably thinking I was about to apologize. But you know what I realized, I said, my voice hardening. I realized that some people deserve to be hurt. Some people deserve to have their masks ripped off and their true faces exposed to the world. The room went silent. Alicia, I said, turning to face her directly. You stood in a church 12 years ago and promised to love me, to honor me, to be faithful to me. And you broke every single one of those promises. Not in a moment of weakness, not in a single mistake, but in a deliberate, calculated affair that lasted months. Greg, please, she started, but I cut her off. And Dominic, you call yourself a man, but you're just a coward. You sneak around behind your wife's back, lie to everyone, use women for your own ego, and then act surprised when there are consequences. Dominic stood up, his face red. You have no right. I have every right, I shouted. You screwed my wife. You destroyed my marriage. You made me a joke in my own community. That's enough, Richard said, stepping forward. Greg, it's not enough, I said, pulling out a remote control. Not even close. I pressed a button, and the large TV screen Richard had mounted on the wall came to life. On it played a compilation video I'd spent weeks creating. Photos of Alicia and Dominic together, text messages between them planning their encounters, recordings of Dominic bragging about the affair to his co-workers, financial records showing hotel charges and gift purchases. The room erupted in gasps and whispers. Alicia buried her face in her hands. Dominic tried to leave, but his path was blocked by his own co-workers, all of whom looked disgusted. Some people wear masks for Halloween, I said, my voice cutting through the chaos. Others wear them their whole lives. Tonight I just helped you take yours off. You're insane, Alicia screamed. You're a psychopath. Maybe, I agreed, or maybe I'm just done being the nice guy who gets walked all over. I pulled out a box and handed it to Dominic. Inside were the keys to his Mustang, or what was left of them. I'd had them cut into pieces. Your car's in the parking lot, I said. Or at least it was. I may have accidentally let it be known to certain people that it would be unattended for a few hours tonight. No idea what condition it's in now. Dominic's face went purple with rage. He lunged at me, but I was ready. Years of boxing training came back in an instant. I sidestepped his clumsy attack and landed a solid punch to his gut, doubling him over. Don't, I said calmly as he gasped for air. You'll only embarrass yourself more. Dominic stumbled toward the door, pushing through the crowd. We all heard the scream from the parking lot a moment later. His precious Mustang was covered, absolutely covered, in graffiti. Every inch of that cherry red paint was now decorated with words like cheater, liar, and various anatomical descriptions. The windows were intact, the mechanics untouched, but the paint job he'd spent 2 years perfecting was destroyed. And I'd live-streamed the whole thing to a private Facebook group that included everyone at the party. Dominic stood in the parking lot, staring at his ruined car, and then he did something I'll never forget. He got in, started the engine, and tried to drive away as fast as possible, probably to escape the humiliation. He made it about 50 feet before losing control and slamming into a fire hydrant. Water exploded into the air as the front end of the Mustang crumpled. Dominic stumbled out of the car, unhurt but completely defeated. The crowd from the party had followed him outside. They stood in Richard's front yard, watching the spectacle, and slowly someone started clapping. Then another person joined in, and another. Soon, half the crowd was applauding, cheering my performance as Dominic sat on the curb next to his destroyed car, his head in his hands. Alicia ran to him, crying, trying to comfort him, but he pushed her away. "This is your fault," he shouted at her. "You and your stupid husband, you ruined everything." "My fault?" Alicia screamed back. "You told me you loved me. You said we'd be together." "I say that to all of them," Dominic yelled. "You're nothing special." And there it was, the final truth spoken in front of everyone. Alicia collapsed onto the wet pavement, sobbing, completely broken. I stood on Richard's porch, watching the scene unfold, feeling a satisfaction so profound it was almost spiritual. This was justice. Not legal justice, not civilized justice, but the raw, primal justice of consequences finally catching up to actions. Susie appeared beside me, her red dress glowing in the porch light. "Well played," she said quietly. "You too. Your evidence made this possible. We make a good team." She handed me an envelope. "Divorce papers. I'm filing tomorrow. Thanks to tonight's little display, I'll get everything. The house, the kids, his pension. He'll be lucky to keep his job." "What about Alicia?" "What about her? She made her choice. Now she gets to live with it." Susie looked at me, her expression almost sympathetic. "You should probably go, before the cops show up." She was right. Sirens were already wailing in the distance, probably responding to reports of the hydrant. I took one last look at the scene. Dominic and Alicia, both broken and exposed, surrounded by the people they'd tried so hard to impress, all of their lies and manipulations finally catching up to them. Then I walked to my car and drove away. 3 months later, my divorce was finalized. Alicia got the house. I didn't want it anymore, but I got to keep my dignity, my self-respect, and the satisfaction of knowing I'd fought back. Dominic lost his job 2 weeks after the party. The video of his car crash went viral locally, and his boss decided the negative attention wasn't worth keeping him around. Susie's divorce went through quickly, and she did indeed get everything. Last I heard, Dominic was living in a studio apartment and working at a warehouse for half his previous salary. Alicia tried to contact me a few times, but I never responded. I heard through mutual friends that she'd moved back in with her parents and was working retail. The social circle that had once welcomed her had completely shut her out. Richard and I are still friends, though things are different now. He understood why I did what I did, even if he didn't approve of the methods. "You could have just divorced her quietly," he said over beers one night. "I could have," I agreed. "But then they would have gotten away with it. They would have moved on, found new victims, and never faced real consequences. And now? Now everyone knows who they really are. Now they have to live with that." Richard nodded slowly. "I guess I can understand that. But Greg, you need to move on now. This can't define you forever." He was right, of course. Revenge is satisfying, but it's not a life. So I threw myself into work, got promoted to regional manager, moved to a new city where no one knew my history. I dated a little, but nothing serious. Maybe someday I'll trust someone enough to try again, or maybe I won't. Either way, I'm okay with it. Because I learned something important through all of this. You don't have to be the nice guy. You don't have to turn the other cheek. Sometimes, when someone hits you, the right response is to hit back harder, to make sure they never even think about doing it again. Some people might call that revenge. I call it justice. And standing in the rain that night, watching Dominic's world crumble around him, watching Alicia finally face the consequences of her choices, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. I felt free. The end. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next story. Write in the comments from which city you are watching,